You're listening to The Coach Show with Coach Banks, Coach Swanson, Coach Kozlerich, and Coach Doherty on the Coaching Culture and Athletics Radio Broadcast Network. Sit back and enjoy the show. The views and opinions discussed in this podcast are not necessarily the opinion of the host or the Coach Show on the Coaching Culture and Athletics Radio Broadcast Network. Let's get it done.
All right, I want to welcome everybody. Hey, you know what? This is CCA Season 2, Episode 11. I think on Spreaker I typed in Episode 10, Coach Swanson, so you're going to have to forgive me for my senility. You know, it's because of my age, right?
It's definitely because of your age. You're getting up there, old man.
Oh, my goodness. Well, you know what? Tonight, folks, you're in for a real treat. I've got a great friend. I think the first time that I ever had a chance to pick this genius's brain was 7 years ago. So you know what? Hey, I'm welcoming Andy to my basically my new format, Coaching Culture and Athletics. Andy Curtis. Hey, welcome to CCA, brother. It's good to have you.
Hey, thanks, Chuck. Thanks, Coach Swanson. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, tonight we're going to talk about training. Combat applications, techniques. Can you tell everybody a little bit about your organization, the combat applications techniques? I do know that you can follow him on Twitter, Instagram, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, well, thanks, Chuck. I appreciate the intro. It's really not an organization. It's basically a program that I developed when I was on a Special Forces A team. And going back to 2003, there used to be 5 ODAs, Operational Detachment Alphas, or A teams, as part of every Special Forces company. And the global war on terror was really picking up, and they wanted to stand up a 6th team for every company. And basically, at that particular point in my life, I had sustained some injuries to my eustachian tubes, which kind of canceled me out from doing some of the amphibious stuff on the dive team that I was on. So I had the option to go to any other team that I wanted. And one of the warrant officers that was on my team, when I was on 325, had basically said, hey, a good opportunity for any young weapons guy or any young special forces guy would to go to stand up a team from the ground level. And they were standing up the 6th team in the company. It was an advanced special operations team. They deal with like sources, networking, unconventional warfare, the very nature of unconventional warfare. And it seemed very interesting to me. It seemed like a challenge. And I said, yeah, that's what I want to do. And, it wasn't necessarily the coolest or sexiest thing, but it really gave me an opportunity to see what it takes to build a special forces team from the ground up and outfit it and develop standard operating procedures and train that team and then take them into combat. And so every member of an A team is assigned with a number of tasks. And generally, there's supposed to be 12 of us for a complete A team. At the time, I think we had something like 6 or 7. And so one of my tasks was I was a weapons sergeant, so I dealt with all the team training when it came to weapons. I was in charge of ammunition. I was in charge of physical fitness, combatives, a whole wide range of things. And the team sergeant who came on board, who basically was one of my he's still like one of my best friends ever. Even after he retired, we've stayed in touch. He said, hey, the government is giving all these special forces teams all this money to get ready for their deployments for GWAT, Global War on Terrorism. He said, and a lot of these teams are just going out and they're blowing the money and they're spending it on all these crazy things as we got the money. It works in the government is if you don't spend the money, you don't get it for the next fiscal year. So the team sergeant says, we're going to spend our money wisely and we're going to get the most bang for our buck. So everybody was tasked with going out and training in all of these different modalities to bring back to the team and then cross-train all the other guys on the team. And I got asked to develop a hand-to-hand combat program, a combatives program for our A team. And in the result of that was I got a huge budget. I got to go out and learn all kinds of martial arts, edge weapon fighting, stick fighting, grappling. Got to talk to surgeons. I got to talk to people with kinesiology degrees, and put together this program that I could train a group of guys to be able to implement and work it very efficiently. And the group of guys that I was working with, they're not all professional athletes. They're not all guys who have trained martial arts their whole lives. They're very gifted guys, and they can pretty much pick up anything that they put their hand in. But these guys don't have hours and hours to train and go to a dojo. These guys have their military job. They're also standing up a team. A lot of these guys really don't have an interest in martial arts. And a lot of these guys may have never done martial arts before, and some of them just don't want to do it. So to do this mandatory training once or twice a week, I have to be able to put this program together so that it's digested in such a way where these guys can take it and run with it almost immediately. And that's really what the program was about. I taught a lot of people the methods and techniques throughout the years. The key thing behind the program is that there's a million techniques out there, So we try to narrow it down to just a handful of techniques and really try to apply the principles that are behind the techniques. And really the program didn't have a name. It was just called Combatives. And in 2006, a guy named Dan Severn, he's a 3-time UFC champ, Hall of Famer, Olympic wrestler, collegiate wrestling coach, Dan the Beast Severn, came out because we're friends, and he was doing some training with military units in Fort Bragg. And during one of the breaks, he said, let's go to Barnes & Noble. Let's check out some books. And I said, sure, we've got some downtime, let's do it. And we're walking through the martial arts and the wrestling, the book out that has all the self-help stuff in it. And he went right to the martial arts stuff, and he said, I wonder if they have any military combatives programs, in books. I said, I don't know. And they had a couple. And I'm not going to say what books they were, but Dan looked through them. He said, this is garbage. And can I say cuss words? He said, this is BS, is what he said.
Yeah, that's fine.
And, he said, this is BS. And he said, this is going to get our guys killed. And it was a very prominent, well-known name who put this book out, and it was a mass marketing campaign for what the Army had just gone to try to get, propaganda to popularize what they were trying to push to. And he turned around and said, your program's better than this. Why don't you write a book? And I said, are you kidding me, man? I sound too stupid to write a book. And I don't know. He pushed me to do it. And about 3 months later, I said, hey, Dan, I'm going to write a book. I said, I don't know what to call it, though. So I got thinking, everyone was doing these acronyms and everything else. And I just said, you know what? I'm just going to call it what it is. It's Combat Application Techniques based on the Principles of Destruction. And that's what I called my first book. And that's kind of what I market the program as now when I teach it to people.
You know what's awesome, Coach Swanson, is he actually, if you look at Andy's background, back in high school, he was a wrestler, right? Mm-hmm. And Andy, you got an idea as far as a technique, an idea from your wrestling coach, right?
Yeah. So, it's not probably one of my proudest moments, but I was not a good top wrestler, and I was not a good bottom wrestler. So you might think, well, what kind of wrestler were you? I was kind of a crappy wrestler when it came down to it, except for the neutral position. And for some reason, I just really took to it. I can get takedowns all day long. I'll get back points all day long. I just wasn't a big finisher. So I'd tech guys. Or, once in a while I'd get them in a really, really good technique and pin them. And my coach said, listen, I'm going to work with your strengths. He was a good coach. He says, I'm going to work with your strengths. We're going to base your game plan around what your strengths are and not your weaknesses. And so he said, you're really good at the neutral position. He said, I really want you to try this. So he got me into the Russian Thai system, and working the 2-on-1 armbar, and going from things like the 2-on-1 to an arm drag, the 2-on-1 to a single leg, the 2-on-1 to a double leg, 2-on-1 to even like a bear hug, and then into a souffle. And he said, get really good at these, be able to work this one technique and be able to work it from every single angle. And no matter what, you're going to get these guys that think, oh, I can stop you because he's just going to go for this one technique. But where am I going to go once I get it? So it's not, and we see it even in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Since that time, I've gotten into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, got my black belt under Professor John Circusano. And even in Jiu-Jitsu, it's not the guy who's good at a million different techniques. It's the guy who's really good at one or two techniques that he can apply from every single angle. And those guys are super dangerous. So my coach kind of taught me that at a young age. It made me very successful with it. I thought that was kind of the key to getting my team trained to be able to be really effective at a program where they don't have very much time to pick it up. And later on, I would go on to learn about things like neuro pathways and, different ways that the body learns, the way that our brain learns things. So you basically enhance neuro pathways when you're doing the same thing all the time from multiple different angles. Your brain triggers something, the message in your body, where it builds these like super highways. Whereas normally if you do a movement a couple times and you don't do it a lot, your body is less likely to do it instinctively because it hasn't fired that chain of neural pathways enough to be able to do it instinctively. But when you train something, maybe 2 or 3 techniques, and you train it from every angle, now you can apply that 2 or 3 techniques almost instinctively without thinking about it. And that kind of, what that lesson I learned in wrestling actually became the basis for the program that we taught our guys.
Coach Swanson?
Wow, that's definitely impressive. It sounds like you've had a lot of success. You've had some wonderful training. If you had to break it down, what do you say would probably be one of your, top 2, top 3 factors that have contributed to your success in doing this?
Honestly, I would say that I always try to keep things simple, and I don't get wrapped around the axle about doing something one specific way. I think if there's one thing that we learn in life is that you're going to run into all kinds of obstacles, right? So I don't get fixated on achieving my goal this specific way. I get fixated on the goal, and I try to achieve that goal the simplest, most effective way possible. And that means I have to accept some of the obstacles that come in the way and, figure out how to deal with those obstacles to still get to that goal. And I think a lot of people, when an obstacle pops up, they see it as a wall, and they can't figure their way out, around or through that wall. Well, nothing says I can't go under the wall. Nothing says I can't go over the wall. So I guess that would probably be my biggest, I'd say that'd probably be my biggest asset and contributors to all the successes that I've enjoyed in my life.
Very great. Thank you. I really like that. The fact that, everyone does see that wall as an obstacle and that it's sitting there on their path and everyone thinks they have to run through it going 100 miles an hour. But you can stop at the wall, you can plan, you can figure out the best possible solution to get over it. Doesn't matter how it takes to get on the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. People are their own worst enemies. People say, well, I want to go out and I want to achieve this. And I want to do it in this time. You're not always going to achieve that goal in the time that you want to achieve it in. But you can still achieve that goal. Like I said, life has a say in things. Circumstances have a say in things. And a lot of times in combat, we would always, we'd go out on these missions, we would train, we would rehearse, we try to do everything as scientifically as possible. And at the end of the day, the bad guy has a say in things too. The environment, the weather, the climate, all these things have a say in it. The end state is, did I achieve my mission? Sometimes not necessarily how you got there as long as you get there. And I don't say that as, well, it's anything goes, walk over whoever you got to walk over to do it. At the end of the day, we have moral responsibilities too, but, that's just kind of how I view it.
As a coach, we look at our teams, and how to build them up and, and to build a culture that's conducive not just winning, but being able to develop and be the best person possible. How many obstacles did you have when you were trying to switch something that was kind of pushed to this MMA style training to what you would have to teach your own troops?
Well, honestly, I had a couple obstacles that were on a team. For the most part, not too many, because being in the position that I was in as part of a special forces unit, we were given a lot of latitude. And if they say, hey, you're the guy, you're the go-to guy for it, everyone would just kind of trust you. Okay. I mean, we all have this mutual trust amongst each other. We all realize that everyone's kind of gone through the same rites of passage to get where they're at. Everyone kind of assumes that because those same standards have been met, you're equally as culpable as the next guy. And so when I said, hey, this is the path that we're going to take to it, yeah, there were some skeptics. There were some guys that, the typical joke be like, I don't speak kung fu, or I don't speak, Tae-Kwan-Do. I speak chink chink, chink chink. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool and all, man. But what are you going to do when you're kicking in a door and some guy, grabs the hold of your gun? You can't present your weapon correctly. Now, you've got to fight that guy, to get control of your gun. So you have to think about things like that. And that. A little bit of skepticism really in the beginning, but the way I try to present things to guys is in a very scientific and methodical manner. I'm not going to present something to you using a lot of bravado or a lot of hype, because hyperbole doesn't really prove anything to these guys. These guys are show me guys. So if I can explain to them, hey, here's a scientific method, and really it's one of the things that was influencing on me when I was a young wrestler and a young martial artist. I remember I didn't want to go to physics class, and I had a assistant coach who was a physics teacher. And he's like, yeah, come here, guy. He's like, let me explain this to you. This technique that you do all the time, there's physics threaded all throughout it. And he broke it down to me, and I was blown away by it. And I said, wow, I want to learn that. I want to learn the insides and outs of that. I want to learn the nuts, the bolts, and the building blocks so that I can better understand my techniques and apply them. So I try to present things like that already digested for my guys, so that when they're getting it, they're not like, oh, this is BS. They're like, no, you know what? That makes sense. So,
Coach Doherty, Coach Swanson, I did find his question. I'm going to ask one more, because I know that you have one, because I heard you click, man. It's kind of like beep, beep.
Nope.
Okay.
Go right ahead.
I'm just messing with you. Coach Doherty asked this question of you, and he was kind of bummed, because he was former, he trained with jiu-jitsu and all that good stuff. He's a wrestling coach. He was super bummed that he was going to miss you tonight, but I'll connect you two. How do you balance the high expectation line and not cross over it and become too overwhelming? And this could be as far as how you're handling the current scope where you're in charge, but kind of put it in a spot so coaches could utilize the same methodology with their own athletes.
Well, it's kind of funny. Years ago, I used to have an issue with expectations. Especially let's say working in a certain environment with a bunch of guys that were selected for the same job. And this is particularly when I got out of the military. And you kind of have these expectations of what everybody should be capable of doing, right? But yet when you get, where the rubber meets the road, they don't all have those expectations. So instead of being really upset about it, you have to realize, okay, so clearly, everybody doesn't start from the same start point. So we've got people that are at different levels. And if you continually have these unrealistic or sometimes expectations that are too high, you're going to find that you're upset all the time. So what I've learned to do is just kind of clear myself of the expectations altogether and say, well, this is the task that needs to be achieved. Let me see what I'm dealing with, and based on what building blocks that I have, we'll figure out the best way to go about dealing with this. And this is something that, we definitely learn a lot in special operations. We're working with indigenous forces, because you're dealing with people that will come to you and they may have zero education, literally zero primary school education. And now you're tasked with teaching these guys tactics, strategies, and methods and techniques that are sometimes in the advanced level to be able to go out and conduct a real-life combat operation. And if you go in there expecting these guys are going to be at, the same level as Americans, you're going to be sorely upset. You're going to be angry, and it's going to impact the way that you lead. And I think the same thing can be broken down to any team level. When you get there, if you're the leader, you have to say, hey, listen, I'm throwing out the expectations. What I do want to do is I want to set this goal. We're going to achieve this goal. I'm going to look at what we've got here. This is what I've got to deal with. Are there some cases where you can say, hey, I'm getting rid of this guy? Sure, you may be able to do that in some cases. But be careful that you don't throw something away where you throw away a guy and this guy has a really strong asset here. Maybe let's say on a team, I don't want to boot this guy off team because this guy might make a really good, I don't know, like a team assistant. This guy might make a really good sport trainer. This guy might, he might be a good water boy. It doesn't matter. He might find a place, and by giving him or her that kind of access and placement to seeing what's going on the team, maybe next season they'll have enough exposure to it to become better. Sometimes people just don't have the same starting points.
That's very true. I think that's something that us as coaches, we forget sometimes when we get, in the heart of our season, that some of these kids didn't have the same starting points as others, and that can be difficult. You were talking earlier about preparation, and then when you get in the heat of things, sometimes, all the preparation doesn't matter because, your opponent or the enemy has something else planned for you. What's some advice you have for younger kids that, people, even adults, that, they have a plan for everything and then they get wrenches thrown at it? What's some advice you have to keep them pushing through, to get them to regroup, to get them to focus on the common goal and not just, something bad's happening? Because it seems like in today's society, as soon as we get thrown a curveball, we focus on that and only that.
Yeah, it's funny. My whole life it seems like, and I think everybody's life has them, You look at it like, man, my whole life has had all these obstacles thrown at me, and somehow I got to where I was at, And the thing that I think is that kept me going the entire time was that, number one, I was very goal-oriented. I said, I'm going to achieve this. Nothing's going to stop me from achieving this. When I hit a bump in the road, I was flexible and said, do I still really want to achieve this goal? Because that's the question everyone has to ask themselves. Is it really worth me going through what I'm going to go through? And if so, then I'm going to continue to do it. I'm going to find a way around it. The third thing I would say is these unrealistic expectations. And I can give you a personal example from my own life. When I was in school, I wanted to be a doctor. I thought, I'm going to be a doctor one day. Well, there was a lot of things going against me, and eventually I ended up giving up on the idea until recently. My family was dirt poor. Literally, there's sometimes the only reason we were able to get food was we hunted out of season sometimes, or somebody in the family would have some extra deer meat laying around. They'd give it to us. I had shoes that were, hand-me-downs from the local church. And so, looking at it, I was like, back in the 1980s, how am I ever going to afford college? People like me don't go to college, And then, when it came time to get to high school, and this is the time that's really important for kids, I was doing really good in wrestling, but the odds that I'm actually going to get a full ride to someplace like Syracuse back when they had a team, that's pretty slim, right? And you've got to really make it on your grades. Well, my grandmother was very ill, and she was pretty much the one raising me, so I spent most of my time taking care of her. What time I wasn't taking care of her, I really wanted to try doing the wrestling thing and the martial arts thing. And you know what? I just decided grades weren't important to me. That made me reevaluate things and say, you know what? I'm probably never going to be a doctor. And I joined the Army. I got the Montgomery GI Bill, got an associate's degree from it, still had a bunch of GI Bill left, got back into school again, said, I really like sports science, got enrolled in the exercise science program, and now I'm looking at moving on to a medical university, literally in the middle of MCAT's program. So it was just one of those things that setting that goal at that particular time, it wasn't right because of a number of reasons. Had I gotten out of high school at the time that I did, and let's say I did have the best grades possible, I wouldn't have had the money. So what did I do? I found another way around. I knew no matter what, I was going to do something in life that I was happy with. And sometimes it takes us forever to find that. And for me, I know that, I can be a doctor. I have the GPA to be able to achieve that. I'm doing well enough in the classes, and I have the ability to get the education. So, it's something that, maybe you set aside and you just don't give up on completely. But I don't think that there's anything that is impossible for anyone as long as they really want it and they ask themselves, do I want it bad enough to where I'm willing to endure to achieve this?
That's wonderful advice, Andy. Thank you. I think there are a lot of people out there, young, old, middle-aged, doesn't matter, that need to hear that, because I think we do get fixated on their goals and we don't realize it in the moment. Even that's our goal, it's just not obtainable, because I think that's important to understand that, especially in today's society where we think that everything's obtainable at our fingertips, it's really not. And people don't seem to realize that. And then, when they do get let down because they don't reach it, it's a huge letdown, and they don't know how to recover sometimes. So thank you for that advice.
You know what I really like to hear, Andy, is I like to hear the people that when you hear that term, because you could have easily decided, you know what, the American dream's dead. You could have just threw up your hands and said, you know what, I'm just going to go do this. I'm not even honing in there, but being able to persevere, through those obstacles. I mean, I'm just going to throw this out there. It appears that over the last 10, 15, even 20 years, that ability to persevere, something that is highly stressful, it's just hard to get over the hump, right?
Here's the deal, and this is something that being in martial arts and being in sports has taught me. I had a great wrestling coach. His name's Mike Milich. He's in the New York State Hall of Fame for wrestling as a coach. And we had some great teams. And he was a very hard coach. He would push you to your limits. And his, I can literally remember being on the mat and just grinding it out. And he's like, well, how bad do you want it? How bad do you want it? It hurts. Keep pushing. And it really comes down to how bad you want it. Unfortunately, we have a society now, and I think, listen, I'm not reaching when I say this. We have a society now that this whole idea of social justice, everyone needs to be a winner, everyone needs to get a trophy, everyone needs to get a prize. It's softened us to the point where it's making it so these guys and gals that are growing up now, they don't really have to push. They don't really have to see how bad that they want it to achieve their goal, because it's there. Someone said, you know what? You don't got to fight so hard for that. Here, we're just going to give it to you. Let's come up with another incentive program. Don't worry, we're going to give you another trophy for this. It might not be the first place trophy, but we're going to give you a trophy. And that's crap. I honestly believe that, and this is why I think sports are so important, and I think that it's so important that coaches are given the latitude to be able to coach the way that they should, to teach these important life lessons. And I think parents should be also reinforcing this, teaching at home. Coaches should be reinforcing it, but to teach these lessons that, hey, if I want something, I'm going to give it my best. And if it isn't coming to me right away, I've just got to keep pushing harder or think of another way around it. But how bad do I want it? How much am I willing to take to get what I want? And I think that's going to give people a greater appreciation for their goals once they achieve it as well, because they're going to say, man, I own that. I did this. I went through all of that to attain this. And it might not be much for you, but it's the world to me.
Coach Swanson, I knew I would get it out of him. I'm pretty good at that.
Yeah, that was great and very well said. I mean, I know Coach Banks and I have conversations that relate to that sometimes, but you put it in such an elegant way, so we appreciate that. So, like I said, you have all these wonderful experiences and everything. What do you think would probably be, just so our listeners would know, one of the highlights of your career so far, that something you look back on and say, you know what, I'm so glad I persevered to get to this point. Just some major highlight.
Oh man, I'd probably start with the first one. I finished high school. Yeah, I'm dead serious.
Yeah.
That was something that I didn't think was going to happen. Like I said, grew up pretty hard. And at one point I was taking care of my grandmother who was very sick. And literally I was so occupied with that and the things going on at home, I just couldn't give school my all. And it didn't become a priority to me. And when she died, my junior year, I quit school. I literally gave up. I was defeated, and I said, I'm not going to go back. I said, for what? What good is this going to do for me? This woman, she raised me. She was my life. I was going to graduate because she wanted it, and it was something that they wanted one of the Curtis boys to graduate high school, and I thought, man, you know what? I'm not even doing that well in school. The only thing I got going for me is my sports, and I've got one more year of that, and the odds that I'm going to do anything with it, who cares? I quit school for a month, and I can remember I was still living in the house that I grew up in, and I was getting ready to, because I had like a bunch of odd jobs that I had already picked up to work, under the table, and I was just going to be like, let's face it, everybody else who dropped out of school. And I remember waiting for my ride, and the school superintendent, Mr. Borden, he come rolling up in the driveway, and I'm thinking, that's the school superintendent. I know who this guy is. And he gets out, and he's in his suit and tie, and he says, good morning, Mr. Curtis. We've been missing you at school. I said, yeah, I'm done. He said, well, it doesn't work that way. There's paperwork you got to fill out and this and that. So I said, I just quit. He said, well, here's what's going to happen. You missed a lot of time. He said, and I don't want to fail you. I want you to finish with your class. I'll do anything that it takes to help you get back on track and get going. And I said, well, they're going to put me home. I know it. And I don't want to put the boys home, and I'm going to run away, and all this. Stop. He said, here's what I'm going to tell you. And I know times were different back then. He says, you show up to school on Monday. He said, I'm not going to ask questions. He said, I'm not going to ask questions where you're living. He said, I'm not going to ask questions how you're doing it, how you're getting by. He said, I can tell you anytime you need help, I'm happy to help you. There's a number of teachers that are already saying they're willing to help you. He says, you just go back to school. We'll put you on a plan. We'll get you back on track, and you will finish with your class. He said, the other alternative is I'll be sending a truant officer out here to come see you. And he wished me a nice day. He said a couple of nice words about my grandmother, because he had known her. My father went through him. My uncle went through him. They didn't finish school, but they knew him. And he said, I'll see you in school on Monday. Come see me when you get here. And I went back to school that Monday. And, so it's I didn't think that it was going to be something I could finish. It was a very hard path for me to get through high school. And I did it. And like I said, that was probably the first big major success in my life. And it's not a lot to some people, but it means a lot to me.
Well, I'm telling you what, I have a lot of faith in the educational system to begin with, and I do know that there are some listeners out there, some of my buddies, and they razz us a little bit, about public schools, this, that, and the other. But I tell you what, man, I'm glad that I'm in that same aspect, as far as never giving up on these kids, pulling them into school, and student athletes out there, if you feel the same way, you got to listen to these stories. I mean, Andy, that's truly inspiring, man.
Yeah, it was a big deal to me.
I mean, that's a very inspiring story, and I hope some people listen to that, because I feel like it's harder for people to kind of pick themselves up these days, especially at a young age once they get down. So, thank you for sharing that and sharing all you have. I think it's been very inspirational, very motivational for me, Coach Banks, as well as hopefully anyone who listens.
Appreciate it, guys.
Now, we got roughly 11 minutes, and I don't know whether, going into our tactics and the wizard knife's gonna do that justice. I might have to bring you on, in a month or so if you're interested, Andy, to go over some of those techniques.
Sure. Yeah, if I'm available, Chuck.
Yeah.
I'm available.
Yeah, and I understand that, but with and we're not going to dig in, to our current situation in depth, but if you was to give some of these athletes some advice, Andy, especially the athletes that have lost their seasons, because there are lots of kids out there mourning, and I just want to take the time, as a coach, as a father that's that's had athletes in the family. It's okay to mourn athletes because your season's been canceled or postponed. It's okay to do that. But what advice would you give to that athlete out there some of those athletes out there, Andy, sports is really the only thing that's kind of bringing them to the educational system.
Yeah, honestly, I could feel that. I was one of those guys. I was one of those students. Man, this is a rough one because when we're younger, we have a tendency to look at the world through a different type of perspective. Everything's much more magnified than what it really is. And I would tell them, hey, this is one of the first big life lessons for you. You're really going to have to take a step back, look at the entire situation, and say, what's the positive that's going to come out of this? And for many of these folks, these young folks that are involved in sports, there is a lot of positives to this. Hey, right now's the time. You can dial it down a little bit, get some rest, relaxation. Look at where you've been in the season right now. Look at what's going strong for you. Look where your weaknesses are. Keep up the strong points, and then start hammering away at those weaknesses for the next season. Because when you get to the next season, those are not weaknesses that are going to be there, because you're already going to have taken care of those. For some of our seniors, hey, it sucks, man. It's the last year of school, but it's not over. For whatever sport that's out there, I can tell you, just from being involved in the martial arts and the grappling and the wrestling world, there are amateur affiliations out there that you can still get involved in, and it doesn't have to be part of the school sports season. So start looking at that, and again, start building upon your weaknesses. And we all have them. Be humble, recognize them. Hey, this season has given me a reprieve. I'm going to go back to work, back to the drawing board, fix what's weak, and just keep what's good already strong. So,
do you think the NCAA should look into adding an extra year for some of these seniors?
I don't know. I honestly, I couldn't give you good advice on that, Chuck.
Coach Swanson?
I mean, I think what you said's great. Kids these days, especially now, sports are year round. I think this is a good time for them to take some time off, to relax, to refocus, to, set some goals and whatnot. Let me see if I can find another one of Doherty's questions, see if we haven't answered it already.
Okay.
Go ahead, Chuck.
While we're waiting, a big part of who you are, Andy, is your insight and your ability to look into the future. Now, not talking about the current situation, but if there was an emergency or something that are things that we should keep, at home or plan for, whether it's a tornado, whether it's whatever situation or crisis that may arise. When you look at emergency planning, how important is it, and what are the main essential things that we need to take care of ourselves?
Apparently, it's toilet paper, right? From what I hear, based on the current situation, the virus will make you have to go to the bathroom a lot and want to clean things. No, seriously, some good things to have around. Listen, it's the essentials. It's always going to be essentials. Water is a big one, and a lot of people don't realize that you don't have to have cases and cases and cases of water, but you should probably have enough to get by for like 72 hours. Because let's be realistic. If I'm standing someplace for 72 hours and there's still no hope in sight, guess what I'm doing? I'm moving somewhere to where I can get that assistance. Does that make sense? We've all got family members who might have a better situation. Maybe somebody's got well water versus city water, etc. So have about 72 hours worth of water. Water is the key to all life. When it comes to other things, I would say you're going to need things like communication source. What if cell phones go down? What's communication source? Do you have a plan of action with your loved ones? Do they know that, hey, if you don't hear from me within this such time, this is what you should do. This is what I'm going to do. Having a backup plan for communications. Spare fuel is always a good thing to have around. We all have cars, it seems like, right? So those cars got to get from point A to point B. And I'm surprised we haven't seen it yet. But, the lines at the gas station, who knows when that's going to come? Do you really want to be stuck in a queue to get, gas when you could have a couple storage cans of gas standing by that you won't have to wait in that line for to get to where you got to go? Medical stuff, first aid kits, definitely a big one. At a minimum, have a tourniquet. Things like rubbing alcohol, hydrogen peroxide, on top of having the disinfectant properties of wounds, you can also use them for disinfectant around the house if you need to. You can mix a little bit of it with water, use it as a spray. Little things like, it's good to have things like toilet paper. Let's not go to extreme. How much are you really going to poop, right? Bleach is another good thing to have. But if you can't get bleach, and this is what I'm seeing, I went to the store the other day, and I just happened to be walking around, and I see all the bleach was out. But, there were aisles and aisles of pool cleaner. And those little bleach tablets that you can use to clean the pool, hey, man, I've got a bunch of those. Baking soda, you can make so much stuff out of bleach and baking soda, it's ridiculous. So, literally, you can make everything from laundry detergent to bleach out of baking soda and those little chlorine tabs. Other than that, food supplies, let's not get crazy. You don't have to have a 3-month supply of meals ready to eat. If you've got a bunch of beans, and I'm not talking canned beans, I'm a big fan of having the staples, bags of beans and rice, every a day to extend as far as I need to. And if I know I'm getting extracted and I'm sitting on that helicopter and I've got a bunch left, guess what? I'm pigging out, So, you start to have to think in a real situation, in which honestly, I'm not going to project anything what we're going through right now. Right now, it doesn't seem as bad to me as I think people are making it. I don't see a reason to panic. But if you end up going into that extreme, understand you may not want to go through all your resources right away, and you may want to go on a calorie-restricted diet, but keep pushing fluids. Water is essential.
And that's the big thing. Here in the Midwest, or even this afternoon, the President of the United States has to come on, all the news stations and tell people to chill out. Quit trying to buy everything right now, right?
Yeah, so about back in January, I've been taught I want to think critically. Instead of saying, what's the situation, where am I at, where am I going, where do I want to go, what's likely to happen, and then how do I deal with each one of these things, people just say, oh, they're doing this, well, I need to do it too. So it's monkey see, monkey do, and this builds up this panic. Part of that panic comes from they weren't prepared to deal with it in the first place. And it's kind of like what I always tell people when they say, well, you're a prepper. I'm really not a prepper guy. I do deal with emergency preparedness. I don't have a bunker somewhere dug in the ground. I don't have like all kinds of like an arsenal somewhere. I just see things happening, and I try to either prepare to avoid it or to mitigate it or defend from it or protect myself from it. And this is kind of how I made my living since I've gotten out of the Army. And so I tell people, being prepared is not a bad thing. When you drive down the road, do you have a spare tire in your car? Do you have a tire iron so that you can change that tire? Okay. Do you have some sort of fix-a-flat? If you have these things, there's nothing wrong with that. Do you have a flashlight? That's just being prepared to deal with an incident. If you're going down the road, you get a flat tire to make your life more convenient. The same thing. You prepare for an emergency. Well, chances are if you prepare for a hurricane, you're going to be preparing for a pandemic. You're going to be preparing for a blizzard. It's all the same stuff. So having whatever it takes to prepare for a hurricane or a blizzard or a pandemic, it should be pretty much the same plan to include what's my plan if where I'm at has gone bad? Where am I going now? For me, it's easy. I'm calling up a family member. Hey, you guys got room for 2 more and a couple dogs, So we don't have to make this really overcomplicated. Really, just keep it simple. And don't freak out.
Yeah, exactly. So people on Spreaker, if you're listening live, I'm going to be canceling it out. Hop on over to YouTube or Facebook, Coaching Culture and Athletics, and you can finish the show over here because I think there's a few more questions we want to ask here. So on Spreaker,